Hello and welcome to the Proof Text Podcast. I'm Michael Halcomb, and today I have with me Dr. Anessa Westbrook, and we're going to be talking about a very contentious passage in the New Testament in 1 Timothy chapter 2, that whole thing about wearing jewelry and self-control and salvation and childbearing, all kinds of interesting things. So stick around. You are not going to want to miss this.
You are listening to Proof Text, a Glossa House podcast exploring the scripture and all things related to it. New episodes are released daily. For more information, check out glossahouse.com and subscribe to our channels on Spotify and YouTube. Welcome and enjoy.
All right, welcome to the Proof Text Podcast. I'm Dr. Michael Halcomb, and today I have with me Dr. Anessa Westbrook. Dr. Westbrook, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
Yes, welcome. Thanks for carving out some time to come on the podcast. And I want to start by asking, where are you?
Well, I'm actually at York University in York, Nebraska.
Okay, all right. Has it got cold there yet?
It's starting to get cold. It was 34 this morning.
Oh, 34. All right, so you guys are almost in snow territory.
Well, not quite, but
Not quite?
we're getting there.
All right.
Yeah.
You're getting there. You guys have some pretty serious snow days out there, don't you?
Sometimes this is going to be my first winter here. So we just moved here over the summer, but we did see a little bit of snow. We escaped a little bit of snow on visits last year.
All right. So what's your role there at York University?
I'm the co-executive director of the newly established Center for Ministry.
Okay.
And I work
Awesome.
with Dr. Scott Laird.
Okay. Great. Well, one of the reasons that you and I connected is because you've recently done some work with Glossa House, and you contributed to a newly published, newly released fest script. And for those watching, or you're going to be able to see it. For those listening, you'll just, of course, be able to hear it. But this is the title of it. The book is Teaching God's Sons and Daughters, Essays in honor of Alan Black. And this was edited by Garrett Best and Lance Hawley. And so you had a chapter in this book. How are you connected to Alan Black, Dr. Black?
Well, I actually went to Harding School of Theology and got my master's and Master of Divinity there. So I had him for a number of classes, and
Okay.
I just loved him as a teacher, as a person. He's just incredible and made such an impact on my understanding of the Bible.
Awesome. Well, the title of your essay in this book is Adornment in Context, illuminating the passages on womanhood in 1 Timothy. So what got you interested in that topic?
Well, I was trying to think of how I could honor him when I was invited to be a part of the project. And I was thinking through, like, what are some of the most impactful things I learned from him? And this particular topic was definitely high on the list. So one of the things he did was he really helped us understand the complexity of the New Testament world. And I think a lot of us went in thinking, oh, well, New Testament world, that's something that's flat. And he
Right.
taught us how to read the Bible and read the different genres in the New Testament, and then understand that each of the settings with the letters was different. And so that's what I was trying to bring to the table.
All right. So, I mean, this is a really contentious passage that you're dealing with in 1 Timothy 2. And Harding is that a Church of Christ school?
Well, I'm at York University, and it is a Church of Christ school.
So York is, but you went to Harding where you studied on it. Is that a Church of Christ
Oh,
school?
yeah.
Yes.
Harding School of Theology. Yeah.
All right. And so I used to be part of the Restoration movement myself. So I was pastoring in the independent Christian churches for a while, and did my undergrad at Kentucky Christian University. And yeah, I had some experience. I never was a member of like the Disciples of Christ, but I did work in the Disciples of Christ seminary for a little bit. So the three streams, right, of the Restoration movement are pretty different, although would you agree that the Church of Christ and the independent Christian churches are more similar than the disciples?
Yeah, I would say so.
They both tend to lean more like biblical exegesis, biblical context, biblical
Mhm.
preaching, those sorts of
Mhm.
things. So I'm, reading the article. It's interesting because I know in a lot of Christian churches of Christ, that like the whole women in ministry thing has been a big issue, still is a pretty big issue. So it's
Mhm.
fascinating to me that as a woman, you're taking on this passage in particular. Um, yeah, well, talk to us about. I can pull up the verses here if you'd like me to do that,
Sure,
and you can
that'd be
kind
great.
of walk us through some of the things that you're seeing, or that you've
Mhm.
seen in the passage. So, for those of you watching, you'll be able to see on the screen here, First Timothy. The article focuses a lot on like 9 through 15. Where would you like me to start?
Yeah,
Start
let's
at.
start with First Timothy 2:9. And
Okay.
I'll say it's been very interesting to me since I studied underneath Dr. Black how confusing these passages are. Because I think we're really overlooking some things that if we understand it, it brings it into focus. And prior to my role here at York, I was an associate professor of Bible and ministry at Harding University. And so I had a chance to talk with students about this, every year. And I still have a chance to speak on some of these things and try to help people understand it. And once I kind of explain what's happening in the larger culture in Ephesus, it seems to really bring this into focus. And so one of the key things that I feel like I learned from Dr. Black was about the new Roman wife. And that was not something that was on my radar. And even when I talk with people who were in the same class and had the same classes as I did, I think it really jumped out at me in a different way, probably because I am a woman. And it once you understand that there is a bigger cultural concern happening, and I think if we said even a cultural war, that's kind of a strong word, but there was so much concern about this particular development that there were a lot of people writing about it, a lot of people concerned about it, not just Christians, but also people in the secular world. And once we see that and we understand what's happening, then a verse like First Timothy 2:9 is just going to make more sense because it's actually speaking to different elements of that.
All right. So walk us through kind of, so what is the new Roman wife, and walk us through just verse by verse kind of what you're seeing in the text here.
So in 9 CE, Augustus actually issued regulations about this. So the new Roman wife had popped up prior to that point. So once we get into the New Testament, this is a concern that's pretty established. And basically, what it is Roman men were not faithful to their wives. And that's something that I know kind of blows our mind, but they they just weren't faithful to their wives. It was common for them to have liaisons with other women. And as some of these women who had some means and came into the marriage bringing something to the table got tired of it, they started to change their behavior. And they started to dress and act like these women that their husbands were having these liaisons with. And so that's basically how this started. After a while, some of them really started to enjoy some of the freedoms that they had. And the birth rate started dropping. There's evidence of that. And so it's interesting to see that there's so much concern that this was something that was such a big deal. And then if you read First Timothy 2:9, where it says women should adorn themselves in respectable apparel with modesty. Okay. So these women were not dressing with modesty and they were dressing to the nines. They were braiding strings of pearls and gold into their hair, basically wearing their wealth on them in a way that we don't. If you think of a princess and how she might fix her hair, I think of Cece, that was in Vienna, and she had her hair, spent hours every day on her hair, just really over the top hairstyles. If you can imagine that and all of the labor and all of the expense and all of the focus that went into it, that's basically what First Timothy 2:9 is speaking to. And it's interesting because when you look at it, if you don't really understand the background of it, it gets kind of confusing why braids are being called out specifically. Or, is it bad that I'm wearing a wedding ring that's gold? So if we just kind of read it without the context, it gets pretty confusing.
So, I mean, I think this is a really important point, and reading in context obviously is critical. I don't know. People often don't take into consideration what's going on with Ephesus, right? At the
Mhm.
time, they don't take into consideration the cult of Artemis. They
Yeah.
typically don't know about the new Roman woman. They don't know this context, right? And let's talk for just a second, and I want to keep going on with the next few verses, just about why that's so critical. Like, what are some of your thoughts on why that's so critical?
Yeah. So when we're thinking of the letters, we've got to remember that those were written to specific churches with a specific context for a specific reason. And I often give the example of, is the culture of New York City the same as the culture of a small town in the Midwest or South? And the answer is no. Like we know that's not. But when we read the Bible, we often forget that these places where these letters are being written are very different. And we've got to take that into account. So when we don't do that, it really affects our understanding of what's happening because we don't we try to piece back together like what is the situation. But where we can't even do that exactly like in Corinth. That's one that's very hairy and has a lot of, contentious verses in it as well. I think Ephesus is a bit easier to focus on. But where we can't do that, if we can at least understand the context better, then that will illuminate what we're reading.
It's fascinating because I've, pastored, I'm also a professor, and I've certainly encountered people who are resistant to historical context and social
Mhm.
context, cultural
Mhm.
context, language context, right? They're kind of like, oh no, this is the Bible. Like, what it says is, like that's it. And
Mhm.
as if they can just open it and read it in a sort of magical way, or just
Mhm.
ignore all that, all that, was shaping this at the time it was written. Like, I love the analogy between New York and a small city, but how do you respond to someone in the pew or in the classroom who's just like, no, this is the Bible. We don't need all that other information.
Well, first of all, probably the best I can, because I've definitely had conversations where I've tried to explain why it's important to understand the context, and it's not going to change their mind. So, yeah, I would just try to point out some examples, of why it's important, and then hope that they'll listen. So,
I often talk about like the text being written to other people, but
mhm,
still being relevant and meaningful
yeah,
for us. And even that is a hard hurdle for some people to
yes,
get over. It's not written to me. Ah, like
uh-huh,
people can't handle that.
yeah,
Yeah. Um,
yeah.
well,
Taking the biblical message over the bridge to try to make the application. Yeah,
yeah.
that's often
Well,
an analogy I use.
as we look at verse 11 here,
Mhm.
11 and 12. There's some tough stuff here. So what's going on
Yeah.
in verse 11?
So, well, let's take a look at 11 and 12 together.
Yeah.
And so this is where, as we're trying to piece things together, and trying to understand what's happening, there's potentially there's potentially multiple options here. And I just think that's something we need to realize, that there's probably something specific that's going on in the background that this is addressing. So, Ephesus. All right. So, Ephesus, the population about this time, Dr. Richard Oster estimated to be about a quarter million. this is huge. About the same time, the population of Athens was about 10,000, just to kind of put that in perspective. It was a just really a confluence of different cultures and a lot of different religions. And there were some very strong, pagan religions that were practiced in this area. And so, as Christians are converting, one of the things that's happening is when they convert, I mean, it's not like somebody comes and erases their memory and they don't remember any of the ways that they worshiped previously. So, that could potentially still have an influence. And we could point to different places in the text where there is concern about them importing that influence and the way they did things prior into the early church and the church fathers, even going into the second century. One of the things that they really focused on was making sure that the way Christianity was practiced was pure.
Right. Right.
And so when we're looking at verses like 11 or 12, we've got to ask the question, what is going on in the broader culture of Ephesus? What are some of the potential things that are happening here that might cause statements like this to be made? Like, there's specific situations. Perhaps some of the women that held higher positions in their pagan religions are coming in and trying to take over and trying to teach. So,
Yeah. So when Paul says, let a woman learn quietly with all submissiveness,
mhm,
he isn't issuing a statement like for all women at all times and all places and all churches. That there is
yeah,
something specific that he's dealing with here in Ephesus, and that is particularly these women who had come from the cult of Artemis and were
mhm.
importing religious practices there and being disruptive, essentially.
Yeah, yeah. And actually, some people have suggested that the word quiet here could actually mean not argumentatively,
Hmm.
which is interesting to me as well.
Yeah, so this word asuchia,
Mhm,
interesting. And then in verse 12, so this it would follow then that when he says, I do not permit a woman to teach or to exercise authority over a man, rather she is to remain quiet. Paul
mhm,
isn't saying like, I don't permit a woman to teach in a Bible college or a
mhm,
church even. That
mhm.
he's essentially um, speaking to how these women from the cult of Artemis have they held positions there, and now they've come into the church, and because they were so steeped in the cult of Artemis that they need to be discipled and
Yeah,
learn the gospel, that they can't just because they were a teacher over there step into a teaching role in the church.
right. Yeah, yeah. And one of the things that this is an example of how just a real cursory and simple reading of this can go wrong. I've heard from multiple different students over the years that they were told, like we've taken First Timothy 2:12, so she's to remain quiet. I mean, to what extent? So these girls, several of them were told that they couldn't even speak in church, that they
Right,
could only whisper a question to their husbands,
right.
and they weren't married, so they were like, "What am I supposed to do?" But it when we don't take into account what's happening, we can get to some really, unusual places with it. So,
Yeah, I mean that results in a very sort of one chauvinistic interpretation, but two, like the outcome of that, like a very oppressive
mhm. Yeah,
interpretation, right?
yeah,
So it seems like, um, for a lack of a better term, ignorance is fueling the hermeneutic in that case, as opposed to
mhm,
information and being
mhm.
informed. So
And
a lot
and if
of
I
go
could
ahead.
speak to that for a
Yeah.
second, it's interesting because we have the same thing happening elsewhere when we read the text too. But we're just taking that into these verses where it really like the impact is very visible. And one of the things I'm passionate about is what is the process that we're using to understand the Bible? We've got to treat the text correctly. We've got to use it consistently and look at it consistently. So we can't pick and choose, like, we're going to do this here and then we're going to go to this other text and treat it completely differently. So,
Right. Right. Um, and then, I mean, I've the next part especially, right?
mhm,
I've heard for a long time that this that the women being quiet
mhm,
and you know learning quietly with all submissiveness is rooted in a creation principle that this goes back to Genesis, and that
mhm,
this God like wove this into the world so that the women are supposed to be in quiet in church, and this was God's
mhm,
plan from the beginning. Like this
mhm,
is the creation order. So looking at verses 13 through 15, how does this
mhm.
relate to the Artemis stuff going on in Ephesus?
Yeah. So when we look at the logic on verses 13 and 14, one of the things that we see is this often used Jewish example of like priority. And so if Adam's formed first, then what? You know,
Right.
and so here, what I kind of see in this is that Paul is doing the same thing. So he's using a Jewish way of thinking to try to explain this. Now, I do feel the need to point out that this is in Ephesus, but Paul is very Jewish. Let's not forget that. He is the Jew of Jews and he was trained by the Jews. He was very high up. And so this is how he's going to think. So he's going to reach in and use different examples and logic and thinking that come naturally to him. And so I think some of that is going on there. But then when you get down to 15, one of the things we see is like a direct teaching about the new Roman wife, because as these women were experiencing this freedom to for of infidelity, to put it, like pretty bluntly, one of the things that they weren't doing was having children. And so this is speaking to that. There's also in Ephesus a proto Gnosticism that seems to be developing. It's not going to be in full bloom until later, but some of the thinking appears to be there. And with Gnosticism, we can't forget that the spiritual is good, but the functions of the body are looked down upon. And so childbearing as just a basic and natural function of women would be something that some of them might have been trying to avoid.
Interesting. So to say she will be saved through childbearing,
Mhm.
and this is another one of these passages that just ripped out of context, I think has really been oppressive to women, right? Like for
Yeah.
especially like barren women. Like,
Yes.
oh, am I not gonna experience salvation because I'm unable to, you know, deliver a child?
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, what particularly is going on with this phrase? I mean, you mentioned that like women aren't, birth rates are dropping and
Mhm.
yeah, what is happening there with that phrase from your perspective?
Well, I'll say that the first thing I do when this comes up is I say, if we have to be saved through physical childbearing, who is not saved? And that would be men,
Exactly.
children, women who aren't having children or can't have children. And that is just does not fly. If you look up at 13 and 14, just right there, it's not going to fly. We all know that's silly. And so I try to do that, just kind of push against it a little bit in a kind way. Um, but what is the gospel about? What does it teach? It doesn't even fit with that. And so there has to be something else going on. So that's when we go back, we take a look at Ephesus, we take a look at what's happening um, with the proto Gnostic ideas with the new Roman wife. And then a third thing that's also happening there has to do with one of the functions of Artemis herself. And that is that women go to Artemis to pray for safety in
Yeah.
childbearing. So it's kind of interesting that this is mentioned here. So it's sort of like when Paul was in Athens and he was talking about Zeus. Like when we read it, we have to have a little bit of help to see that sometimes, to see everything he was saying. But he's making direct references to it so that people who were in that society and understood it would see it. And so this
Yeah.
is, I think, one of those direct references to Artemis. Basically, one of the points here is that God is the one. God is the one that will help save you through childbearing.
So when I read this, and I think I'm close to where you are in your article,
Mhm.
but when I read this, so I look at uh verses 11 and 12, and I
Mhm.
understand that to be women, these women had positions in the cult of Artemis.
Mhm.
However, they'd converted and come into the church. And
Mhm.
now Paul is saying, you've just converted. You need to be discipled and mentored. You can't, just because you had authority and, positions, teaching over there, it doesn't mean you have that in the church. You just
Mhm.
converted. You need to be discipled. And
Mhm.
because some of the things that you taught and you believed over there were wrong. And then he gives,
Mhm.
for me, like in my view, he gives two examples of where
Mhm.
they went wrong. The first one is
Mhm.
verses 13 and 14, where they
Mhm.
believed Artemis, right? She was the goddess of fertility. Like the
Mhm.
belief Artemis created or had some role in the creation, that Artemis, the female, is first, right? And
Mhm.
that perhaps is even
Mhm.
responsible for the state of the world. And so Paul's saying, no, 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 you've got that wrong. The
Mhm.
scriptural story is
Mhm.
Adam was formed first, then Eve.
Yeah.
Adam wasn't deceived, but the woman was deceived and became the transgressor. So there's one example of what you got
Uh,
wrong, that you were, teaching, or the myth that you learned over there in the Artemis cult. The second thing you got wrong is that you'll be saved by Artemis through your
mhm.
childbearing. But
Mhm.
in fact, it's God who will preserve you
Yeah.
through this childbearing, not Artemis, the goddess of fertility.
Mhm.
And so I think that's, I don't know, like that's where I'm at on. Are we on the
Yeah,
same?
I agree with you. Yeah,
Yeah.
on those points.
So I think, just to clarify, I think 13 and 14 are exhibit A, and 15
Mhm.
is exhibit B of the
Mhm.
teachings, two teachings that they got wrong in the cult of Artemis.
Mhm.
And he's exposing that here with these three verses.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is just a great example. I mean, it's really one of the best examples, I think, in the whole like New Testament, of where understanding a little bit of context goes
Mhm.
such a long.
Mhm. Definitely. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, this is great. I appreciate you contributing to the Festschrift for Dr. Black. And
I was honored. I couldn't
yes,
I was so honored to honor him in this way.
and I appreciate you guys working with Glossa House, and hopefully you were pleased with the final product. The book looks great,
Yeah,
and
it looks great.
lots of great essays in there.
Mhm.
So for those watching or listening, I'd encourage you to head over to glowsthehouse.com and pick up a copy of Teaching God's Sons and Daughters, which Dr. Westbrook has contributed to. Yeah, Dr. Westbrook, you're on social media. Where can people find you and connect with you?
Well, we have a website for the Center for Ministry, and so if somebody wants to reach out, just look for York University Center for Ministry or Center for Ministry at york.edu. That's probably
All
the
right.
easiest way. And I am on social media. Yeah.
Excellent. And after you guys check out glowshouse.com and get in touch with Dr. Westbrook, if you'd like to talk with her, or find out more about her research, subscribe to the podcast, whether it's on Spotify or Apple or YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure you follow us. So yeah, Dr. Westbrook, thanks so much for carving out some time today and coming to share with us.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks so much to you guys for watching or listening. We're going to stop there and say we hope that helps.
Interested in growing your ancient language skills but not sure where to start? Glow's House can help. From illustrated readers and short stories to lexicons and grammars, Glossa House offers a variety of resources for beginning, intermediate, and experienced ancient language learners. Head to glossahouse.com today. Glossa House, language resources for the global community.